The harsh whistle of the afternoon wind carried the whispers that had haunted Harriet Vance her entire life, whispers that branded her a mistake, the living reminder of her mother's shameful indiscretion. The year was 1876, and as the stagecoach rumbled toward Genoa, Nevada, Harriet clutched her small leather satchel tighter, her knuckles whitening with determination. At 22 years of age, she was finally fleeing the only home she'd ever known, seeking a fresh start in a place where nobody knew her story. "Last stop before Genoa, folks," the driver called, his voice barely audible above the rattle of wheels and the snorting of tired horses. Harriet adjusted her simple blue dress and straightened her worn bonnet. The other passengers, a middle-aged couple and an elderly man with spectacles, had barely acknowledged her during the 3-day journey from Sacramento. She preferred it that way. Years of being the town pariah had taught her the value of invisibility. "Shouldn't be more than an hour now, miss," the driver said when he caught her eye during the brief stop. He was one of the few who had shown her any kindness. "First time to Genoa?" "Yes, sir," she replied, tucking a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "I have an arrangement to work at the Willow Creek Inn." The driver nodded approvingly. "Decent place. Mrs. Porter, who runs it, is strict but fair." Harriet forced a small smile. She didn't mention that Mrs. Porter was actually her mother's distant cousin, the only relative willing to offer her a position after her mother's death 3 months ago. The letter had been curt but clear. She would earn her keep as a housekeeper, and nothing more should be expected. When the stagecoach finally pulled into Genoa's dusty Main Street, the sun was beginning its descent behind the Sierra Nevada mountains. Harriet stepped down carefully, her legs stiff from the journey. The driver handed her the small trunk containing her few possessions. "Town's seen better days," he commented, gesturing toward the row of weathered buildings. "Silver Rush moved on, but folks here are resilient." Harriet thanked him and turned to face her new home. Genoa was indeed smaller than she had imagined, but it possessed a certain rugged charm with its backdrop of mountains and scattered ponderosa pines. A handful of businesses lined the main street: a general store, a saloon, a small bank, and what appeared to be a blacksmith shop. Beyond these stood modest homes and, in the distance, scattered ranches dotting the valley floor. The Willow Creek Inn wasn't difficult to find. It stood 2 stories tall at the north end of town, its white paint peeling but its porch swept clean. Harriet gathered her courage and approached the door, ignoring the curious glances from 2 men lounging outside the saloon across the street. Before she could knock, the door swung open, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 50s, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. "You must be Harriet," the woman said, her eyes traveling critically from Harriet's dusty boots to her simple bonnet. "I'm Eugenia Porter. You're late." "The stagecoach was delayed by a broken wheel, Mrs. Porter," Harriet explained, trying to keep the exhaustion from her voice. "I apologize for the inconvenience." Mrs. Porter's expression didn't soften, but she stepped aside. "Your room is upstairs, last door on the left. It's small, but you'll have it to yourself. I expect you to be up at 5 to help with breakfast for the guests." "We'll discuss your other duties in the morning." Harriet nodded gratefully. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mrs. Porter. I promise I won't disappoint you." "Your mother wrote that you're a hard worker," Mrs. Porter replied, her tone softening slightly. "I hope that's true." "And Harriet," she added as the young woman picked up her trunk, "Genoa is a small town. People will eventually learn who you are, where you came from. Best to keep to yourself and let your work speak for you." The familiar ache of shame blossomed in Harriet's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand." Her room, as promised, was indeed small, barely fitting a narrow bed, a washstand, and a hook for her few clothes. But it was clean, and the window overlooked the eastern valley where the first stars were beginning to appear. Harriet unpacked her meager belongings, placed her mother's worn Bible on the nightstand, and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to cry quietly, with the practiced silence of someone accustomed to hiding her grief. Tomorrow, she would begin again. Tonight, she would mourn the past one last time. Dawn arrived with unmerciful brightness. Harriet had barely slept, but she was downstairs at precisely 5 o'clock, her hair neatly braided and her apron freshly pressed. Mrs. Porter, already busy kneading dough in the kitchen, gave her an approving nod. "The coffee needs brewing, and the dining room tables need setting," she instructed. "We have 7 guests this morning. The miners take their breakfast at 5:30 sharp." Harriet worked quickly, finding a rhythm in the familiar tasks. By the time the first guests appeared, 3 bleary-eyed silver miners heading for a distant claim, the dining room was prepared. Coffee was brewing, and the aroma of biscuits filled the air. The next few days passed in a blur of laundry, cleaning, and kitchen work. Harriet kept to herself, speaking only when spoken to and performing her duties with quiet efficiency. Mrs. Porter seemed satisfied, and the few guests paid her little attention exactly as she preferred. On her 4th day in Genoa, while hanging sheets to dry behind the inn, Harriet first saw him. He came riding up on a tall chestnut gelding, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning sun. From a distance, she could make out a strong jawline beneath the shadow of his hat, and the confident way he sat his horse spoke of a man at home in the saddle. Harriet ducked her head and continued her work, but she couldn't help glancing up again as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post. He was tall, she noted, with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were those of a working cowboy: dusty denim, scuffed boots, and a faded red bandana at his throat. He disappeared into the front of the inn, and Harriet released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She was pinning the last sheet to the line when Mrs. Porter called from the back door. "Harriet, come inside and bring a tray of coffee to the front parlor. There's a gentleman here about the cattle drive." Hurrying to obey, Harriet smoothed her hair and straightened her apron before carefully carrying the requested tray into the small sitting room. The cowboy stood looking out the window, his hat in his hands, revealing thick dark hair that indeed curled at the ends. He turned at her entrance, and Harriet almost faltered under the direct gaze of the deepest blue eyes she had ever seen. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice a pleasant baritone with the slightest hint of a southern drawl. Mrs. Porter gestured impatiently. "Harriet, this is Mr. Tucker Winters. He's the foreman at the Rockingham Ranch. Mr. Winters, my new assistant, Harriet Vance." Harriet bobbed a small curtsy, keeping her eyes lowered. "Pleased to meet you, sir." "The pleasure is mine, Miss Vance," he replied, and something in his tone made her look up. He was smiling, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to utterly captivating. Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "That will be all, Harriet," Mrs. Porter said pointedly. Harriet nodded and retreated, but not before noticing how Mr. Winters's eyes lingered on her face with frank appreciation. No man had ever looked at her that way before, not with scorn or pity, but with genuine interest. She told herself it meant nothing. Men like Tucker Winters didn't court girls like her. Over the next 2 weeks, Harriet settled into the routines of the inn and the rhythms of Genoa. She learned that the town, while small, was an important stop on the emigrant trail and boasted Nevada's first newspaper. Its residents were a mix of longtime settlers, hopeful miners, and ranchers who worked the valleys spreading east from the Sierra Nevada mountains. Tucker Winters returned to the inn regularly, sometimes for meals, sometimes to discuss business with travelers. Each time, He made a point of greeting Harriet with a smile and a tip of his hat. Each time, she felt that unfamiliar flutter in her chest. "That Winters boy has been stopping by more than usual," Mrs. Porter remarked one evening as they cleaned the kitchen, "and I doubt it's for my apple pie." Harriet concentrated on scrubbing a stubborn pot. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean," Mrs. Porter sighed. "Girl, I'm old but not blind. He finds excuses to come in whenever you're about, and you light up like a lantern when he walks through that door." Harriet began, then stopped. There was no use denying it. "It doesn't matter. Once he learns about me, about my mother, he'll stay away." Mrs. Porter dried her hands on her apron and fixed Harriet with a stern look. "Your mother made her choices, and yes, they had consequences. But you are not her mistake, Harriet, no matter what those small-minded folks back home told you." Tears pricked at Harriet's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Porter. But the truth remains, I was born on the wrong side of respectability. No decent man would—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Porter interrupted. "Out here, people care more about who you are than where you came from. Tucker Winters is a good man from what I hear. Honest. Hard-working." Harriet managed a small smile. "Even so, there's no point in dreaming of impossibilities." The next morning dawned clear and cool, promising the first truly pleasant day after a stretch of oppressive heat. Mrs. Porter, in an unusual display of generosity, told Harriet to take the afternoon off once the luncheon dishes were washed. "There's a small library at the schoolhouse," she suggested. "Miss Thompson doesn't mind visitors when school's not in session. I know how you enjoy your books." Grateful for the unexpected freedom, Harriet finished her morning tasks with extra care. After changing into her one good dress, a modest blue cotton with white piping, she set off down the main street, a borrowed basket over her arm. She had nearly reached the small white schoolhouse when she heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. "Miss Vance," called a familiar voice. Harriet turned to see Tucker Winters guiding his horse alongside her, his smile as warm as the afternoon sun. "Mr. Winters," she acknowledged, fighting the sudden racing of her heart. He dismounted in one fluid motion. "Beautiful day for a walk. Mind if I join you?" I was just going to the schoolhouse library," she stammered. "Perfect. I've been meaning to return this book to Miss Thompson myself." He patted his saddlebag, though Harriet suspected this was an improvised excuse. "May I walk with you?" It would be impolite to refuse, she told herself, ignoring the voice of caution in her mind. "Of course." They walked side by side, his horse following obediently behind. Tucker shortened his long strides to match her pace, and for a moment they moved in awkward silence. "How are you finding Genoa, Miss Vance?" he finally asked. "It's a lovely town," she replied honestly. "Smaller than I expected, but friendly," he nodded. "Been here my whole life. Can't imagine living anywhere else, though I've traveled some. There's something about these mountains, the way they change with the seasons, gets in your blood." His obvious love for his home was endearing, and Harriet found herself relaxing slightly. "You work at the Rockingham Ranch?" she asked, remembering Mrs. Porter's introduction. "Foreman there," he confirmed. "Been with Mr. McAllister since I was 16. Started as just another ranch hand but worked my way up." There was quiet pride in his voice. "Hoping to have my own spread someday. Got a little land staked out already west of here. Just need to build it up." "That sounds wonderful," Harriet said, meaning it. His ambition was admirable. "And you, if you don't mind me asking, what brought you to our little corner of Nevada?" the question she'd been dreading. Harriet kept her eyes on the path ahead. "My mother passed away 3 months ago. Mrs. Porter is my distant cousin. She offered me a position." "I'm sorry about your mother," he said, his voice genuinely sympathetic. "Thank you," Harriet replied softly. "No father in the picture." His tone was carefully casual, but Harriet tensed nonetheless. "No," she said shortly. Tucker must have sensed her discomfort, for he changed the subject smoothly. "So you like to read? What kind of books?" The simple question opened a floodgate. Books had been Harriet's escape for as long as she could remember, and she found herself talking animatedly about her favorites: Dickens, the Bronte sisters, even Homer in translation. Tucker listened attentively, occasionally offering his own opinions, which were surprisingly well-informed for a cowboy. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married," he explained when she commented on this. "She made sure all us kids had education, even when Pa thought too much book learning was useless for ranching. Turns out, being able to read contracts and calculate numbers comes in mighty handy." They reached the schoolhouse, where the teacher, Miss Thompson, welcomed them warmly. Harriet spent a blissful hour browsing the small but respectable collection of books, while Tucker chatted with the teacher about town matters. When they finally left, Harriet had 2 treasured volumes carefully wrapped in her basket. The walk back to town seemed to pass in minutes, filled with easy conversation. Tucker told her about growing up in Genoa, about his 3 older sisters who had all married and moved away, about the challenges and joys of ranch life. Harriet found herself sharing small, safe pieces of her own story: her love of music, her skill with embroidery, funny incidents from the inn. When they reached the Willow Creek Inn, Harriet was reluctant for their time together to end. Tucker seemed to feel the same, lingering at the bottom of the porch steps. "Thank you for your company, Miss Vance," he said, his blue eyes intent on her face. "I enjoyed our conversation." "As did I, Mr. Winters," she replied honestly. He twisted his hat in his hands for a moment, then squared his shoulders as if coming to a decision. "There's a social gathering at the church next Saturday evening. Music, dancing, pie auction, that sort of thing. I'd be honored if you would allow me to escort you." Harriet stared at him, too surprised to speak immediately. A social gathering, with dancing, with him. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know if Mrs. Porter can spare me," she managed finally. "I already asked her," he admitted with a boyish grin. "She said you're entitled to an evening off." "Oh." Harriet felt cornered, yet strangely touched by his forethought. "Mr. Winters, Tucker, please." "Tucker," she amended, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "You're very kind, but you don't know me, not really." His expression grew serious. "I'd like to, though, very much." The sincerity in his voice weakened her resolve. What harm could one evening do? Perhaps just once she could pretend to be like other young women, carefree, deserving of attention, worthy of courtship. "All right," she said softly. "Thank you for the invitation." His smile could have lit the darkening street. "I'll call for you at 6. He mounted his horse with the same fluid grace she had admired earlier. "Until Saturday, Harriet." She watched him ride away, her name hanging in the air between them like a promise. Word of Tucker Winters's interest in the new girl spread through Genoa with the efficiency of a telegraph wire. By Thursday, Harriet had endured numerous curious glances from townspeople and several pointed inquiries from inn guests. Mrs. Porter, to her credit, shooed away the most persistent questioners. "Folks need to mind their own business," she grumbled as she and Harriet prepared dinner on Friday evening. "As if a young man calling on a young woman is anything extraordinary." "But it is when the young woman is me," Harriet said quietly, slicing carrots with methodical precision. "Mrs. Porter, perhaps I shouldn't go tomorrow. I don't want to cause gossip that might reflect poorly on the inn." Mrs. Porter put her hands on her hips. "Harriet Vance, you stop that nonsense right now. You will go to that social, you will hold your head high, and you will enjoy yourself. The only ones who should be ashamed are those wagging tongues with nothing better to do than speculate on other people's lives. Harriet managed a small smile. You've been very kind to me. Nonsense. You work harder than any girl I've ever employed, ask for nothing, and never complain. Mrs. Porter's severe expression softened slightly. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Tears threatened, and Harriet blinked them away. I hope so. Now, Mrs. Porter continued briskly, about tomorrow evening. That blue dress of yours is perfectly respectable but a bit plain for a social. I have something that might suit you better. After dinner service was complete, Mrs. Porter led Harriet upstairs to her private quarters, a place Harriet had never entered. From an old cedar chest, she withdrew a dress of soft green muslin with delicate lace trim at the collar and cuffs. This was my daughter's, Mrs. Porter explained, running a hand over the fabric. Before she moved to San Francisco with that banker husband of hers, she was about your size. It's beautiful, Harriet breathed, but I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Mrs. Porter interrupted. It's just gathering dust here, try it on. The dress fit as if it had been made for her, the color bringing out the auburn highlights in her hair and the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Mrs. Porter nodded in satisfaction. There now. Tucker Winters won't know what hit him. Saturday evening arrived all too quickly. Harriet stood in her small room, heart pounding as she smoothed the green muslin dress and adjusted the simple cameo brooch Mrs. Porter had lent her for luck, she had said. Her hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face. At precisely 6 o'clock, she heard Mrs. Porter greeting someone downstairs. Taking a deep breath, Harriet descended to find Tucker Winters standing in the front parlor, looking so handsome in his Sunday best that her step faltered. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt with a string tie under a black vest and jacket. His eyes widened when he saw her, and for a moment he seemed speechless. "Miss Vance," he finally managed, "you look absolutely beautiful." Harriet blushed. "Thank you, Mr. Winters." "You're very kind." "Tucker," he reminded her with a smile. "Tucker," she amended, returning his smile shyly. Mrs. Porter watched their exchange with poorly concealed satisfaction. "You young people should get going. Don't keep her out too late, Mr. Winters." "Yes, madam," he agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled with amusement. He offered Harriet his arm. "Shall we?" The church social was already in full swing when they arrived. Lanterns hung from the trees surrounding the white clapboard building, and a fiddle player accompanied by a banjo created lively music. Tables laden with food lined one side of the churchyard, while couples danced on a wooden platform constructed for the occasion. Harriet felt the weight of curious stares as Tucker led her into the gathering. She recognized many of the faces from her weeks in town: the storekeeper, the blacksmith and his family, several regular customers from the inn. Most nodded politely, though a few women whispered behind their hands. "Ignore them," Tucker said quietly, his hand warm at the small of her back. "They're just curious about the beautiful woman I'm lucky enough to escort tonight." His unwavering attention gave Harriet courage. He introduced her to numerous people, his hand never leaving her elbow, his expression clearly communicating that she was under his protection. Gradually, the initial stares subsided, and Harriet found herself drawn into conversations about town events, the unseasonably warm weather, and the upcoming harvest festival. "May I have this dance?" Tucker asked as the musicians began a waltz. Harriet hesitated. "I'm afraid I'm not very practiced," she admitted. "There weren't many occasions for dancing where I came from." "Just follow my lead," he encouraged, taking her hand. "I promise not to let you fall." His confidence was infectious, and Harriet found herself being guided onto the dance floor. Tucker's hand at her waist was respectful but firm, his other hand holding hers with surprising gentleness for a man who worked with cattle and horses. After a few tentative steps, Harriet relaxed into the rhythm, allowing herself to be led through the swirling couples. "You're a natural," Tucker told her, his blue eyes warm with admiration. "You're an excellent teacher," she countered, surprised by her own boldness. They danced 2 more waltzes, then joined a lively Virginia reel that left Harriet breathless with laughter. During a break in the music, Tucker brought her a cup of punch and led her to a quiet bench beneath an old cottonwood tree. "Having a good time?" he asked, his expression hopeful. "The best," Harriet confessed. "I can't remember when I've enjoyed myself so much." "Good." He looked pleased. "I've wanted to ask you to step out with me since the first moment I saw you hanging those sheets behind the inn. You looked like a painting come to life with the sun catching in your hair." Harriet blushed at his poetic observation. "You saw me before we were introduced." He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I may have ridden past the inn a few extra times that week, hoping to catch another glimpse of you." The admission sent a thrill through Harriet, but it was quickly followed by the familiar wave of guilt and shame. Here was this wonderful man, clearly interested in her, and she was allowing him to believe she was someone worthy of his attention. "Tucker," she began hesitantly, "there are things about me, about my past, that you should know." His expression grew serious. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to, Harriet." "But I do," she insisted, Before this goes any further." She took a deep breath. "My mother never married, I never knew my father. Where I come from, they called me her voice faltered, a mistake." The evidence of her sin. She couldn't meet his eyes, afraid of what she might see there. The seconds of silence stretched unbearably. "Look at me, Harriet," Tucker finally said, his voice gentle but firm. Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his face. Instead of the disgust or pity she expected, she found only compassion and something warmer, something that made her breath catch. "The circumstances of your birth don't define you," he said quietly. "Out here, people are judged by their actions, their character. And from what I've seen, you're the most hard-working, kind-hearted woman I've ever met." "You don't understand," she whispered. "People will talk. It could affect your standing in the community, your position at the ranch." Tucker's jaw set stubbornly. "Let them talk." "And Hank McAllister judges a man by how he handles horses and cattle, not by who he courts." He took her hand in his. "Harriet, I'm not asking for anything but the chance to know you better, to spend time with you. Can you give me that?" The hope in his eyes was her undoing. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." His smile returned, brighter than before. "Then that's settled." He stood, pulling her gently to her feet. "Now, I believe they're starting the pie auction, and Mrs. Porter mentioned you baked an apple pie that might just win first prize." The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of happiness. Harriet's pie did indeed fetch the highest price bid on repeatedly by Tucker and the young doctor, until Tucker emerged triumphant. They shared it later, sitting with a group of Tucker's friends who treated Harriet with easy acceptance that made her heart swell. When Tucker escorted her back to the inn, the moon was high and the town quiet. They paused at the bottom of the porch steps. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," Harriet said, meaning it more than she could express. "Thank you for agreeing to come," Tucker replied. He reached out tentatively, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. The touch, innocent as it was, sent warmth coursing through her. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps we could go for a ride if Mrs. Porter can spare you." "I'd like that," Harriet said, surprising herself with her eagerness. Tucker's smile was tender in the moonlight. "Until tomorrow, then." He took her hand, and in a gesture that seemed both old-fashioned and heart-stoppingly intimate, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Harriet floated up to her room, unable to stop smiling even as she prepared for bed. For the first time in her life, she allowed herself to hope for a future different from the lonely existence she had always expected. It was a dangerous feeling, this hope, but tonight she embraced it. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Harriet's life. Tucker called on her regularly, taking her riding through the beautiful country surrounding Genoa, accompanying her to church services, and sometimes simply sitting with her on the inn's back porch in the evening, talking until Mrs. Porter pointedly mentioned the late hour. Harriet learned that Tucker was 26, the youngest of 4 children. His father had been one of Genoa's early settlers, arriving in 1855 to raise cattle in the fertile Carson Valley. Tucker had practically grown up in the saddle, and his understanding of ranching extended beyond mere cattle management to a profound knowledge of the land itself, its seasons, its capabilities, its needs in turn. She shared more of herself than she ever had with anyone. She told him about growing up in the shadow of her mother's disgrace, about finding solace in books and music, about her dreams of someday having a home of her own where she would never feel unwelcome. "You'll have that," Tucker promised one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "A home where you belong." There was something in his voice that made Harriet's heart race, but he said nothing more on the subject that night. October arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color in the aspens dotting the mountainsides. Tucker had been absent for nearly 2 weeks, accompanying a cattle drive to a distant ranch. Harriet tried not to count the days until his return, but each sunset without him left her more aware of how deeply he had worked his way into her heart. She was sweeping the front porch of the inn when she finally saw him riding into town, dusty and travel-worn but unmistakably Tucker. Forgetting propriety, she set aside her broom and hurried down the steps as he dismounted. "You're back," she said, unable to hide her joy. Tucker's tired face broke into a radiant smile. "Told you I'd return before the first snow." He looked as if he might embrace her, then remembered they were on the main street in broad daylight. Instead, he took her hand briefly. "I've missed you, Harriet." "And I you," she admitted, blushing at her own boldness. "I need to see to my horse and report to Mr. McAllister," he said reluctantly. "But may I call on you this evening? There's something important I need to ask you." Harriet's heart skipped a beat. "Of course, I'll be here." The hours until evening stretched endlessly. Mrs. Porter, noticing Harriet's distraction, finally sighed and shooed her upstairs. "Go make yourself presentable," she instructed. "I'll finish the dinner service." Harriet gratefully obeyed, changing into her green dress and arranging her hair with trembling fingers. Could Tucker possibly be planning what she dared not even think? It seemed too much to hope for, and yet. He arrived precisely at 7, freshly shaven and wearing his best clothes despite the obvious fatigue in his face. Mrs. Porter discreetly retired to her quarters after serving them coffee in the parlor, leaving them alone with the door conspicuously ajar for propriety's sake. "The drive went well?" Harriet asked, noting the new lines around Tucker's eyes. "Well enough." "Long and dusty, but the cattle fetched a good price." He set down his coffee cup, seemingly nervous. "Harriet, there's something I've been wanting to tell you, to ask you." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "These past months getting to know you have been the best of my life," he began, moving to sit beside her on the small sofa. "You're not like anyone I've ever met. You're strong, even though life hasn't been kind to you. You're gentle, even though you've had little gentleness shown to you. And you're beautiful, inside and out." Harriet felt tears gathering but blinked them away, not wanting to miss a word. "I told you once about the land I've been saving for," Tucker continued, taking her hand in his. What I didn't tell you is why. I've been building a home there, Harriet. A real home, with a proper parlor for your books and windows that catch the morning sun and a porch where we could sit in the evenings. Tucker, she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. The day I first saw you, he said, his blue eyes intent on hers. Something told me you were meant to be in that house. That you were my destiny, as surely as those mountains out there are part of this land. He slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Harriet Vance, I love you with everything I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Joy exploded in Harriet's chest, so intense it was almost painful. But even in this moment, the shadows of the past reached for her. Are you certain, Tucker? People will talk. They might let them talk, he interrupted firmly. I love you. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Nothing else matters. The sincerity in his eyes vanquished her final doubts. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Tucker Winters, I will marry you. His answering smile was incandescent. He rose and pulled her gently to her feet, then, with infinite tenderness, kissed her. It was Harriet's first kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally parted, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. You've made me the happiest man in Nevada territory. And I'm the happiest woman, she replied truthfully. A discreet cough from the doorway made them step apart. Mrs. Porter stood there, looking torn between propriety and pleasure. I take it congratulations are in order, she asked dryly, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. Tucker nodded, keeping Harriet's hand firmly in his. If you approve, Mrs. Porter. I know I should have asked your permission first as Harriet's closest relative, but nonsense, Mrs. Porter interrupted. Harriet is a grown woman capable of making her own choices. Her stern face softened into a rare smile, and she's made an excellent one if you ask me. Harriet crossed the room to embrace her cousin. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, Mrs. Porter patted her back awkwardly, unused to such displays. Your mother would be happy for you, she said quietly. That's what matters. The news of their engagement spread through Genoa with predictable speed. To Harriet's surprise and relief, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Tucker was well respected in the community, and his obvious devotion to Harriet seemed to override any potential gossip about her background. Hank McAllister, Tucker's employer, personally visited the inn to congratulate them. A gruff man in his 60s with a weathered face and kind eyes, he shook Harriet's hand with genuine warmth. This boy's the best foreman I've ever had, he told her. And the first time he mentioned you, I knew he was a goner, never seen him so smitten. The wedding was set for late November, before the worst of winter set in. Tucker was eager to show Harriet the house he'd been building, and one crisp Sunday afternoon, he brought a wagon to the inn to take her there. It's not quite finished, he warned as they drove west of town, following the meandering Carson River. But the roof is on, the windows are in, and the main rooms are nearly done. Harriet could hardly contain her excitement. I can't believe you've been building this all along. Tucker looked slightly sheepish. Started it last spring, actually, before I even met you. Something told me it was time to prepare for my future. They crested a small rise, and there it was, a two-story house of golden pine, nestled against a backdrop of tall trees. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and chimneys at either end promised warmth in winter. Oh, Tucker, Harriet breathed. It's beautiful. Pride shone in his eyes as he helped her down from the wagon. Come see inside. The interior was indeed unfinished, with some walls still showing bare studs and floors not yet laid in the upper rooms. But the main floor boasted a spacious kitchen with a massive hearth, a cozy parlor with built-in bookshelves, and a dining room large enough for family gatherings. "I thought our bedroom could be here," Tucker said, leading her to a corner room with windows facing east and south. "You'd get the morning sun, and in the afternoon you can see all the way to the river." Harriet tried to imagine waking in this room, beside this man, for all the days of her life. The happiness of it almost overwhelmed her. "It's perfect," she managed, blinking back tears. Tucker showed her the remaining rooms, pointing out where he planned to add finishing touches, asking her opinion on where furniture should go. "And upstairs," he added with a hint of shyness, "there are 3 more bedrooms. For our children. Someday." Harriet's heart swelled at the thought. Children of her own who would never know the shame she had carried, who would be raised in love and security. "I can't wait to make this a home with you," she told him, meaning every word. As they stood on the porch before leaving, Tucker wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing out at the land that would be theirs. 50 acres, he said. "Not as big as the Rocking M, but enough to start our own small herd. Good water, good grass." "It's more than I ever dreamed of having," Harriet said honestly, leaning back against his solid warmth. "You deserve it all, Harriet," he murmured against her hair. "And I intend to spend my life making sure you have it." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a flurry of preparations. Mrs. Porter insisted on providing Harriet with a proper trousseau, ordering fabric from Carson City for new dresses and supervising the sewing. The ladies of the church quilting circle presented her with a beautiful wedding quilt in shades of blue and green. Tucker's sisters, arriving from California and Utah, welcomed Harriet with open arms and practical gifts for her new home. Tucker divided his time between his duties at the Rocking M and finishing their house, often working by lamplight long into the evening. Harriet visited whenever possible, helping to hang curtains, arrange furniture donated by various townsfolk, and stock the kitchen with essential supplies. 2 days before the wedding, an early snowstorm blew in from the mountains. Harriet stood at the inn's window, watching the swirling flakes with concern. "Do you think it will affect the ceremony?" she asked Mrs. Porter. "Takes more than a little snow to keep these Nevada folk from a celebration," Mrs. Porter assured her. "Besides, the church is only a short walk, and Tucker would wade through a blizzard to claim you as his bride." Harriet smiled at the image. "I still can't quite believe it's happening." Mrs. Porter paused in her knitting. "You deserve happiness, Harriet. I hope you've finally started to believe that." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, the fresh snow glittering like diamonds in the early light. Harriet woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep, and watched the sky gradually brighten from her small window for the last time. Mrs. Porter had closed the inn to regular guests for the day, transforming the dining room for the wedding breakfast that would follow the ceremony. When she came to help Harriet dress, she brought a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "This was your mother's," she explained, handing it to Harriet. "She sent it to me before she passed, asking that I give it to you on your wedding day." With trembling fingers, Harriet unwrapped the package to find a delicate lace handkerchief and a small gold locket. Inside the locket was a tiny portrait of her mother, young and smiling, her eyes so like Harriet's own, full of life. "She wanted you to know how much she loved you, Mrs. Porter said softly. How proud she was of the woman you became, despite the hardships her choices caused you. Tears filled Harriet's eyes. "I wish she could be here." "She is, in a way," Mrs. Porter said, uncharacteristically gentle. "Now let's get you ready. Your young man will be pacing the church floor by now." The wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory silk with pearl buttons and lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Porter had splurged on ordering it from San Francisco, waving away Harriet's protests. "A bride should feel beautiful on her wedding day," she had insisted. And beautiful Harriet did feel as she walked through the snowy streets to the church on Mrs. Porter's arm, her mother's locket nestled against her heart. The small building was filled to capacity with townsfolk and ranchers from the surrounding valley. All turned to watch her entrance. But Harriet saw only Tucker, standing tall and handsome at the altar, his face transforming with wonder and love as she walked toward him. "You are so beautiful," he whispered as she reached his side. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was brief but deeply meaningful. When Tucker placed the simple gold band on Harriet's finger, his hand was steady, his voice clear and certain as he repeated his vows. Harriet's own voice trembled slightly with emotion, but her heart was sure. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister concluded with a smile. "Tucker, you may kiss your bride." Tucker's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Winters, the church erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration at the inn afterward was joyous and lively. Harriet found herself embraced by what seemed like every woman in town, each offering congratulations and often a piece of well-meant advice for married life. Tucker remained close by her side, his hand often finding hers as if to reassure himself that she was truly his. Late in the afternoon, as the winter light began to fade, Tucker leaned close to her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Winters." Home. The word had never sounded so sweet. They said their goodbyes amid good-natured teasing and made their way to where Tucker's wagon waited, now decorated with ribbons and bells by his mischievous ranch friends. The snow had stopped, leaving the world hushed and magical as they drove toward their new life together. The house looked like a dream in the fading light, windows glowing with welcoming warmth. Tucker had arranged for one of his sisters to come ahead and light all the lamps and stoke the fires. Before Harriet could climb down from the wagon, Tucker was beside her, sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition says I carry my bride over the threshold," he explained with a grin. Harriet laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck as he carried her up the porch steps and through the front door into their home. Inside, a fire crackled in the parlor hearth, and the delicious aroma of awaiting supper filled the air. Tucker set Harriet gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I like the sound of that," Harriet admitted, gazing up at the face of the man who had changed her world. "Which part?" Tucker teased. "Mrs. Winters or home?" "Both," she answered truthfully. "All of it, you." His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that left her breathless. When he finally pulled away, his blue eyes were dark with desire and love. "I meant what I said in my vows, Harriet," he told her seriously. "I will cherish you all the days of my life. Whatever comes, whatever challenges we face, you will never doubt that you are my heart, my home, my destiny." "And you are mine," Harriet replied, the words a sacred promise. "Forever." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, the moonlight casting silver patterns through the curtains, Harriet reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a girl defined by others' mistakes to a woman cherished and chosen, from someone who had never belonged to someone who had found her home. Tucker's arm tightened around her, as if sensing her thoughts. "Happy," he murmured sleepily. Harriet pressed closer to his warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Completely," she whispered. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came new beginnings. The land around their home transformed from white to green, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in riots of color. Tucker's small herd of cattle grew with the addition of calves, and Harriet planted a garden that promised summer bounty. Life settled into pleasant routines. Tucker worked long hours, splitting his time between their property and his duties at the Rocking M, while Harriet managed their home and began offering piano lessons to children in town. Twice monthly, they hosted dinner for friends and neighbors, their table always welcoming. Mrs. Porter became a frequent visitor, her stern demeanor softening as she taught Harriet her treasured family recipes and helped her put up preserves for winter. "Never thought I'd see you so settled," she remarked one afternoon as they picked berries behind the house. "It suits you." "I never thought I could be this happy," Harriet admitted. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find it's all been a dream." Mrs. Porter shook her head. "This is real, girl. You've earned it." In late summer, Harriet confirmed what she had begun to suspect: she was expecting a child. When she told Tucker, his joy was boundless. He lifted her off her feet and spun her in a circle, then immediately set her down with a look of concern. "Should I not have done that? I don't want to hurt you or the baby." Harriet laughed, touching his worried face. "I'm not made of glass, Tucker. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." Nevertheless, he treated her with such tender care in the months that followed that Harriet sometimes had to remind him she was perfectly capable of carrying a bucket of water or bringing in firewood. "The doctor said moderate activity is good for me," she insisted when he tried to prevent her from kneading bread. Winter returned, harsher this time, with storms that isolated their home for days at a stretch. Tucker stocked the house with supplies and never ventured far, unwilling to leave Harriet alone as her time drew near. Their son was born on a clear February night in 1878, with Mrs. Porter and the town's midwife in attendance. After hours of labor that tested Harriet's endurance, she finally held a squalling, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Tucker, allowed into the bedroom at last, approached the bed with awe on his face. "He's perfect," he whispered, tentatively touching the tiny hand that immediately closed around his finger. "Just like his mother." "We should name him Henry after your father," Harriet suggested, watching the love bloom on her husband's face. "Henry Thomas Winters," Tucker agreed. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." Mrs. Porter, observing from the doorway, nodded in approval. "You've done well, both of you." As their family grew, so did their ranch. By the time Henry was walking, Tucker had expanded their herd significantly and hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. His reputation for breeding quality cattle spread throughout the territory, bringing buyers from as far as California. Harriet flourished in her roles as wife, mother, and increasingly, business partner. Her careful bookkeeping and talent for organization complemented Tucker's practical knowledge of cattle and land. Together, they built something neither could have created alone. Their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth after Harriet's mother, arrived in the autumn of 1880. She had Harriet's auburn hair and Tucker's blue eyes, a combination that Tucker declared dangerous for any young man within 50 miles. "She'll be breaking hearts before she can walk," he predicted, cradling the infant with the confidence of an experienced father. Harriet watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "Like father, like daughter," she teased. "You broke quite a few hearts yourself when you chose me." Tucker looked up from their daughter's face, his expression serious. "There was never any choice, Harriet. From the moment I saw you, there was only you." Life wasn't without its challenges. A severe drought in '82 threatened their herd and stretched their resources thin. The winter of '85 brought illness that confined Henry to bed for weeks, frightening them both with his rasping cough and burning fever. The expansion of the railroad brought changes to Genoa, some welcome, some concerning. But through it all, They faced each challenge together, their partnership strengthening with each obstacle overcome. Their home remained a haven, filled with music from Harriet's piano, laughter from their children, and the steady, enduring love they shared. In the spring of 1886, as they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised Harriet with a special gift, a small framed deed to the original 50 acres where their home stood. "I don't understand," Harriet said, examining the document. "We already own this land." "Look at the name on the deed," Tucker urged, his eyes twinkling with secret pleasure. Harriet gasped as she read. "Harriet Elizabeth Winters, sole owner. This land is yours," Tucker explained, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, whatever the future brings, you will always have a home that belongs to you and no one else." Tears filled Harriet's eyes as she understood the profound meaning behind his gift. "Tucker, I don't know what to say. You once told me that all you ever wanted was a place where you truly belonged," he reminded her, his voice gentle. "I wanted to make sure you knew beyond any doubt that this is that place, that no one can ever take it from you." "I've never doubted that I belong with you," Harriet said softly. "From the moment you called me your destiny, I knew I was home." As twilight descended on their land, they sat together on the porch swing Tucker had built during Harriet's first pregnancy. Inside, Henry practiced his reading lessons with Elizabeth, their voices drifting through the open windows. In the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. Tucker's arm rested comfortably around Harriet's shoulders, his fingers absently playing with a strand of her hair, now showing the first threads of silver. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question he posed on each anniversary. Harriet leaned into his embrace, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from a frightened young woman stepping off a stagecoach to the confident wife and mother she had become, from a man who had glimpsed his destiny hanging laundry to the respected rancher beside her. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Every step led me to you, to our children, to this life we've built." Tucker pressed a kiss to her temple. "They called you a mistake," he murmured, "but I called you my destiny, and I meant every word of it, still do, forever will." "Forever," Harriet echoed, as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above their home. The years continued their relentless march. Henry grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's build and his mother's gentle spirit. Elizabeth blossomed into a spirited young woman whose determination and intelligence reminded everyone of both her parents. The Winters ranch prospered, eventually growing to over 300 acres with one of the finest herds in the eastern Sierra. In 1896, as Nevada celebrated its statehood and the new century approached, Harriet and Tucker hosted the wedding of their eldest child. Henry married Julia Thompson, the daughter of Harriet's old friend the schoolteacher, in a ceremony that brought the entire community together. "Never thought I'd be old enough to have a married son," Tucker commented as they watched the young couple depart for their honeymoon. "You're not old," Harriet protested, though the silver now outweighed the dark in his hair and lines of experience mapped both their faces. "Just seasoned." Tucker laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been when she first fell in love with him. "Seasoned, eh? I like that better than getting long in the tooth, which is how Hank McAllister described me last week." 2 years later, Elizabeth married the son of a neighboring rancher, a union that eventually merged their properties and expanded the Winters' legacy. When their first grandchild was born, a boy with Tucker's blue eyes and unmistakable chin, Harriet felt the wheel of life turning full circle. "What do you think of being a grandmother?" Tucker asked as they drove home from visiting the new parents. Harriet considered the question. "It feels right," she decided. "Like we've reached exactly where we're meant to be." The new century brought automobiles to Genoa, followed by electricity and eventually telephones. The town grew, though it never lost its essential character. Tucker and Harriet watched these changes with the perspective of those who had seen much of life's ebb and flow. In 1917, as America entered the Great War, their grandsons enlisted, bringing a new kind of worry to their peaceful existence. Tucker, though now in his 60s, threw himself into increasing production on the ranch to support the war effort, while Harriet organized the town's women to knit socks and prepare care packages for the troops. "We've been fortunate," Tucker observed one evening as they read the latest war news by the fire, "to have lived in peace for so long." Harriet reached across to take his hand. "We've been fortunate in so many ways." When their grandsons returned safely in 1919, the celebration at the Winters Ranch was legendary. 5 generations gathered under the old cottonwoods. Tucker and Harriet, their children and spouses, grandchildren and their partners, and the newest additions, great-grandchildren who toddled among the adults on unsteady legs. "Did you ever imagine this?" Henry asked his mother as they watched the family from the porch. "When you first came to Genoa, did you ever dream your life would turn out this way?" Harriet shook her head, remembering the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so many years ago. "Never. I was just hoping to survive, to find a quiet corner where I wouldn't be judged too harshly." "Instead, you found Dad," Henry said with a smile. "He found me," Harriet corrected gently, "and he saw something in me that no one else had bothered to look for." "Worth," Tucker's voice came from behind them as he joined them on the porch. "Strength, beauty." He slipped his arm around Harriet's waist, still her anchor after more than 4 decades together. "But mostly, I just saw the other half of my soul." In 1926, on their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire town of Genoa turned out to honor Tucker and Harriet Winters. The celebration was held in the town square, with tables laden with food, a band playing tunes from across the decades, and speeches from friends old and new. Mayor Johnson presented them with a plaque commemorating their contributions to the community. "The Winters family has been a cornerstone of Genoa for generations," he proclaimed. "Their generosity during hard times, their leadership during challenges, and their unwavering commitment to each other and to this town stand as an example to us all." Later, as they danced together to a waltz that reminded them of their first dance at the church social so long ago, Tucker held Harriet close. 50 years, he marveled. "Seems like yesterday and forever all at once." "The best 50 years any woman could ask for," Harriet replied, meaning every word. Despite the arthritis that had begun to stiffen her joints and the reading glasses she now needed, she felt young in his arms, as if no time had passed since that first waltz. "I'd do it all again," Tucker told her seriously. "Every moment, every day, I'd choose you all over again." "As would I," Harriet whispered. "My cowboy, my destiny." Their great-granddaughter, little Harriet named in her honor, ran up to tug at her skirt. "Great-grandma, will you tell us the story? The one about how great-grandpa called you his destiny," Tucker laughed. "That's a long story, little one, perhaps another time." But later that night, as the youngest generation of Winters' children gathered around them in the parlor of their home, the same home Tucker had built with his own hands, they shared their story once more. Not all of it, of course, but the parts that mattered. How a young woman seeking refuge had found love instead, how a cowboy had recognized his future in a girl hanging laundry, how a family legacy had been born from what others had called a mistake. "And that," Tucker concluded, his voice still strong despite his years, "is why you must never judge others too quickly. The person someone else calls a mistake might just be your own destiny waiting to be discovered." The children nodded solemnly, though the youngest ones didn't fully understand the meaning behind his words. But someday they would, and the story would continue, passed down through generations yet unborn. Time, ever relentless, continued its march. Tucker and Harriet grew older, their steps slower, their days quieter. But their love remained as vibrant as ever, expressed now in the comfortable silences of those who have shared a lifetime, in the gentle adjustments to each other's needs, in the unwavering certainty of belonging together. When Tucker passed peacefully in his sleep in 1932, just days after their 56th wedding anniversary, Harriet felt as if half of herself had departed. Yet she found strength in the legacy they had built together, the family that surrounded her with love, the community that honored Tucker's memory, the land that would sustain generations of winters to come. "He called you his destiny," Elizabeth reminded her mother gently at the funeral, as Harriet stood straight-backed beside the grave, her white hair gleaming in the autumn sun. "And he meant every word of it." "As did I," Harriet replied, her voice steady despite her grief. "And our destiny isn't over, Elizabeth. It continues in you, in your children, in theirs. What we built together lives on." Harriet herself lived 4 more years, long enough to welcome 3 more great-great-grandchildren into the world, long enough to see the Winters Ranch declared one of the oldest continuously operating family ranches in Nevada, long enough to know with certainty that what she and Tucker had created would endure. On a spring morning in 1936, with the wildflowers blooming across the meadows just as they had when she first arrived in Genoa 60 years earlier, Harriet Elizabeth Winters closed her eyes for the final time. She was 92 years old, surrounded by generations of the family she and Tucker had founded, in the home he had built for her with love. They buried her beside Tucker, beneath the old cottonwood tree that had witnessed their early days together. The epitaph on their shared headstone read simply, "Destined for each other, united forever." And so ended the earthly chapter of a love story that had begun with whispers of mistake and shame, but had blossomed into a legacy of belonging and purpose. Yet in the stories told around family gatherings, in the values passed from one generation to the next, in the continued prosperity of the land they had loved, Tucker and Harriet's story continued a testament to the enduring power of seeing beyond labels to the true worth of a human heart. For in Genoa, Nevada, whenever young people speak of true love, someone inevitably mentions Tucker Winters, who saw a frightened young woman hanging laundry and recognized his destiny, and how he meant every word of it, not just for a moment or a season, but for all the days of his life and beyond. Forever,